Hey, everybody. Before we get started, I'd like to ask you to purchase my new book. It's called Exit Ready Marketing, and it's already a #1 Amazon bestseller. And it covers all the core concepts that we take our clients through here at How to SaaS. It's a great read for founders, investors, operating partners, and marketers. And there's a ton of value that you're going to be able to bring back to your respective companies based on the content that's inside this book. So, my ask is go buy the book. It's available on Amazon and on your Kindle, on Barnes and Noble, and even Apple Books. Give it a read. Let me know what you think about the content, and hopefully it helps you grow your respective companies. So with that said, let's jump right in and enjoy today's podcast.
No one should feel bad about the fact that they, were around for a long time and now they're going slow. And that's why you're here. That's why you got an investment from private equity, is like you built something valuable and people are recognizing that. And that's why they want to make an investment in you. And that's a good thing. That's something you should be proud of. Like if you were a little startup that started last month, you would have much more modern development practices. So what?
Welcome to the Private Equity Value Creation podcast, where we interview leading investors, operators, bankers, and advisors to help you answer one question: how do we increase the enterprise value of our companies? My name is Shiv, and each episode I will dive deep with a guest to help you become a better value creator and capital allocator. So with that said, let's jump right in and let's get started with today's episode. My guest today is Dave Mangot, and he is the founder of Mangoteque, and he helps private equity firms figure out the DevOps and technological processes for their portfolio companies. He is also the author of DevOps Patterns for Private Equity. And what I really enjoyed about this conversation is Dave has a ton of expertise on how engineering and product organizations can ship product faster as a way of generating more value for their companies. In a past life, I have led large product teams, and a ton of what Dave was talking about are problems that we were trying to figure out at the time. And eventually, as we figured things out and got to more high degree of sophistication, there were a lot of returns to the business that we were able to generate that we couldn't before making those changes. And so Dave brings that expertise in a structured format for companies to think about their maturity as engineering and technical organizations and how to bring that value faster to markets so that they can ultimately deliver a better product and be more competitive in the marketplace. So as you listen to it, I really hope you take away a lot from it as you think about your companies or your portfolio and where you can probably benefit from thinking about your technical organizations in this way. So with that said, I'll leave you right to it. Enjoy the episode. All right, David, welcome to the show. How's it going?
Good. Nice to be here, Shiv. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, excited to have you on. And this is a bit of a different one. I read your book and a big fan of a lot of the things that you had to say on DevOps and shipping product. And so excited for the audience to learn from you and your background. So why don't we start there? Walk us through how you got here and what your experience is.
Sure. I moved to Silicon Valley in the late 90s and hilariously had no idea that there was this dot-com boom thing going on. I was just, here to go to graduate school and whatever. And people found out I knew about computers and they offered me a job and then another job and another job. And ultimately, I wound up being an architect in infrastructure engineering for Salesforce. So got to work on enterprise software at extremely large scales and high transaction rates and high amounts of security and compliance and all that other fun stuff. Went on to run a global site reliability engineering organization for SolarWinds, which is basically the area of the business that was all the cloud company acquisitions, so all their SaaS stuff. But Salesforce, early in SaaS, the SolarWinds, all the SaaS acquisitions that they did. I ran an engineering organization inside each of those companies. And during that time, SolarWinds got bought by Thoma Bravo and Silver Lake, which was my first real introduction to private equity, and wound up developing relationships, especially inside Thoma Bravo, and after I left SolarWinds, started working with portfolio companies from different private equity firms, and I really loved it. And like you kind of probably read in the beginning of the book, the thing I like about private equity, in particular, and SaaS, is that everyone's really serious, and I don't mean serious like in a like stodgy, awful way, but serious like we want to get results. We have an investment thesis that's really clear. We know what we want. We know what our constraints are. There's going to be constraints around time. There's going to be constraints around money. Almost always, they want to increase value. So certainly things that got a company to where they are at that point, not necessarily the things that are going to carry them to the next level. And I'm feeling like you're probably going to say it's the same thing with marketing. The things that got them there aren't going to take them to the next level. And so I love it because I get to work with these companies on taking them to the next level and helping them do it themselves. So I'm a solo. I don't bring in dozens of people and put them on your payroll or anything like that. It's just me, but I help people get the most out of the teams that they have. And we know from the research, so when you were alluding to DevOps, the high performers are twice as likely to meet or exceed their organization's performance goals. So whether that's revenue, customer satisfaction, customer acquisition, whatever those things happen to be, those are the results. So that's what I'm there for.
That's awesome. And it's funny because the business that you have built here is very similar to our business, but on the DevOps side. So it's interesting to meet like a counterpart from a different function. But talk a little bit more about this idea of shipping product and how it's critical to value creation. I think that's kind of where you start your book. And just from my experience, in a different life, when I
Yeah.
was the CMO of Wild Apricot, slowly my role expanded into leading product initiatives and eventually leading the product team and working with engineers to lead strategic initiatives. Then we got acquired by private equity, and I ended up leading the product organization of 4 different companies at the same time, and along with the marketing hat. But we don't talk about that as much because what we do is the marketing work. But as I went on that journey, I learned that we talk about marketing and sales and growth often as separate from product. And in the early stages, people talk about product market fit. But as you grow as a business, that product element is just so critical to achieving growth objectives and growth targets. And how you accomplish that is actually by shipping product and having great processes and listening to customers and then delivering what you've promised and having something that people can actually use. So just talk about that because that's kind of where you start your book, and just from a technical perspective, how you see that.
Yeah, so the book is called DevOps Patterns for Private Equity. And for me, DevOps is about shipping with speed and quality. And so, you know, I ultimately look at this, or I explain to a lot of people, this is kind of like Moneyball. You want to have more at bats, right? And you want them to be quality at bats. So those are your speed and your quality, going up and striking out, all that useful, as I know from watching too much baseball recently. Anyways, so, but the interesting thing about getting good at delivering software, which is ultimately what we're trying to do here, is it allows you to take advantage of market opportunities that maybe you wouldn't be able to take advantage of otherwise. So this also means, giving customers the things that they want. And so some of the examples I give in the book is like, I worked on a CDN, content delivery network, for cable and wireless in the early 2000s. And one of the customers we had was a bunch of the major movie studios were getting together, and they were trying to figure out how to do streaming movies. Streaming movies, right? Right? It's 2024. We're all like, streaming movies. Of course, everybody's streaming movies. What's the big deal? But like, back then there were no real streaming movies. It was a wreck. You had all this, super proprietary software and all these other things, and the movie studios were, trying to do this in the early 2000s. And ultimately Netflix at the time had been shipping those red envelopes, but Netflix ultimately came to dominate, streaming movies. Well, how? Why, it doesn't make any sense, right? I mean, the movie studios, they're not short of cash. They have lots of money. They probably hired the best consultants that they could that told them, we're going to write all this software, we're going to ship it once a year. This is how we do things. This is how the world works. And Netflix doesn't do that. And Netflix is good at delivering software. And Netflix, ultimately came to win this battle, even though they came to the battle years late, and then they moved to the cloud, and that's a whole famous DevOps story and things like that. But Amazon, they were a bookstore. Does anyone think of Amazon as a bookstore anymore? Google was a search engine. I remember when, Google was still hosted at Stanford. Does anyone think of Google as simply a search engine and that's all they do anymore? Like, it's not, and those companies are good at delivering software. And so when you can deliver with speed and quality, you get more at bats. And so if I go into a portfolio company and they tell me, we do quarterly releases, I'm like, okay, so you have 4 times a year to get it, to have the opportunity to get it right, to achieve that. Product market fit isn't so much of a thing with private equity anymore. We already have that. But, what are the things that the customers want? What are the things that we have to do to keep the software running? Like all those things. If I release 4 times a year, I get 4 at-bats. If I release software once a week or once a day, now we're talking 50 at-bats, 100 at-bats, things like that. And that is really just, it's asymmetrical warfare at that point. It's not a fair fight because I get 50 chances to really make my customers happy, and you get 4. And it turns out that we've also learned from the DevOps movement that releasing 4 times a year is way less safe than releasing 50 times a year. And you and I can get into why that is. But,
So you opened a lot of threads there. I want to make sure we get to all of them. So
cool.
the idea of releasing more and continuous delivery versus once in a while delivering something. Yeah, that's like a popular term and everybody understands that. I guess, is your point that the more you deliver product and ship product, you're more likely to discover the right areas that your product can actually drive growth from and find more users or deliver more value to them?
Yeah, I mean, I would, you ran a product organization, so you probably can tell me the answer to this question, but I would imagine that everything that we release to our customers is a hypothesis. It's a hypothesis about this is what they want, this is what they need. And often we release things and our customers give us feedback and say, this is great. If this could do this other thing, it would be super valuable for us. We would never be able to run our business without it once we had that, and being able to, what are you going to do about that kind of feedback, right? We do a lot in product. We do a lot of like reaching out to the customer ahead of time, and try to find out what they need. But, there's that whole thing of, Henry Ford, we would have built them a faster mechanical horse or something like that. Like, all that research is really important, but ultimately we need to release things that are super valuable to our customers, and we need to respond to, changes in the market. Everybody now it wants to jump on the AI bandwagon, which is great. Don't get me wrong. I have an LLM running here locally on my machine that I use when I need it for stuff. But like, how do you take advantage of that? If your product roadmap says that we can release the next new thing in March of 2025, okay, but your competition is going to release the AI thing next month. What are you going to do about that?
So, and how do you bridge that gap? And I guess also I'm mindful of the fact that even though it's 2024, there's a big chunk of the software market that is legacy or on-prem and isn't ready for this type of operational infrastructure to deploy software at a faster rate. And so How do you bridge that gap if you're companies like that? And then obviously companies that are more multi-tenant and they're able to do that, like how do you look at those? Because I think those are almost two different problems.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of W. Edwards Deming, who was the statistician who helped turn around Japan after World War II, and he has a great quote, which is "Survival isn't mandatory." So, for the companies that are more legacy and things like that, you got to come up to speed. That's it. If survival is not mandatory, there's no guarantee that all these, I talk to lots of companies that are like, we're going too slow. These startups are coming after us. They're eating into our market space. What do we do? I'm like, you got to go faster. And, the great thing or the nice thing, whatever you want to call it, is we know how to do this. It's not something that has to be invented from whole cloth. Like, we know the things that help you go faster. We know things like automated testing helps you go faster. I can't tell you how many companies I go into and they're like, well, we write the software, then it goes to the QA people for a few weeks, and then okay, but that, in lean, we call those are handoffs, right? And there's a lot of waste in the system, but you know, you take weeks to do testing where your competitors take hours. That's just not a fair fight again. And we know how to do it. And I've worked with plenty of private equity investors who are willing to make that investment and say, we need to get this company going, and we're willing to bring in people to help write automated tests, and whether that's valuable or not is a whole other discussion. But we need to catch up, and a lot of these people are moving to the cloud, which there's all these arguments about cloud and is it expensive, and that's really not what it's about. The cloud is about agility. It is about, like, I want to be able to spin up a representative test environment and know whether this stuff really works or whether I'm guessing. And like, I know as somebody who is, if I'm running a business, I don't want guessing. I want answers. I want someone to say, like, look, we tested it and it works. Instead of, well, is it going to work when we give it to the customers? I don't know, maybe. I can't run a business like that. And so, like, there's definitely ways of getting these companies to go faster. And we're not going to flip a switch, and they're not going to go faster overnight. Obviously, there's, this is complicated, and this is how I help companies, navigate these waters. Like, it's complicated, but that's okay. So what? It's hard. Big deal. We're going to do it anyway.
What would you say are the stages between like very immature, or not immature, but like on-prem, more legacy, these handful of releases a year versus this continuous delivery, and then everything in between? Like, what are those stages of evolution that companies need to get through, and how can they move through that faster?
Well, faster is, again, like, it's some of these things are going to take the amount of time they're going to take. But generally, like, what I see often, and this isn't always, because some companies do things that I think are a little weird, but that's okay. I think they're cool if it fits in with their objectives and their time frames and all those other things. But generally, there's on-premise software, which is like you said, legacy, things like that. It's very difficult to maintain because you don't control the environments where this stuff is running. If you, let's say, wanted a new database for some new feature, how do you get a new database on your customer's environment? Oh, I got to ask their IT people for more equipment. Oh my God. It's kind of a crazy nightmare. So, that's, that on premise is kind of where you're starting. A lot of companies I see move to what I call the hosted phase, which is basically we take a lot of this on premise stuff and they just dump it into the cloud, like, which, you know, this doesn't sound super awesome, but, now I'm running, let's say I had 1,000 customers. Now I'm running 1,000 instances of my software, but I'm running it. I'm running it in the cloud. I'm running it, with all the things that the cloud has to offer. And like you and I just talked about a few minutes ago, That's flexibility. And flexibility is just a huge advantage when I want to go fast. Flexibility is like just unlocks all kinds of things. And at that point, when they're in the cloud in this hosted stage, what we're trying to do is, this is another Deming kind of concept, is reduce variation, right? So you mentioned, like, the Holy Grail is sort of this, multi-tenant, we release all the time kinds of things. Well, that's really hard to do when everything is a beautiful artisanal custom snowflake. I can't. It's hard to get efficiencies, right? You had Vinny from JMI Equity on the podcast, and he was saying, like, when you want to scale, you need efficiency, right? You don't just need capacity. And so, the cloud has, in theory, unlimited capacity, which is fine, whatever. That's not what you need. You need efficiency. So we reduce variation. We start figuring out, what are the custom things? What can we turn into a configuration variable? How can we combine databases so that each customer has their own, data in there, but we know the differences? And over time, we keep iterating and iterating until we get to that multi-tenant SaaS sort of place, which, why does all private equity love to turn on-premise software into multi-tenant SaaS? Because our margins are incredible in multi-tenant SaaS. The incremental cost of adding a customer is nothing. The incremental cost of adding a hosted environment is I have to spin up all this new infrastructure for each one of these clients. And that doesn't mean I can't make money there, but make a heck of a lot more money if my margin is really large because the incremental costs are low.
How long should this process take? And even multi-tenant, they're not always at the most sophisticated level at all times, but just to set expectations, right? Because even we get this question on the marketing side where people want to ramp up pipeline and demand gen and revenue, but there's all this foundational work that needs to be done before you can actually get to the revenue generation phase. And everybody wants it in the next few weeks or the next couple of months. And there's this, I have to go through an education phase to say, no, we need to invest, and you need to be comfortable with knowing this is going to take 3 months on the lower end and probably 6 months on the larger side as we try to figure this out. And you have to be willing to invest that time and money to be able to do that, because one way or another, you're going to have to make that investment. So I imagine this is very similar to that, but just help us understand, like, what does that look like in each of these phases, getting to that level of sophistication?
So you and I both, are doing consulting stuff. So I'll give you the very consulting answer, which is it depends. But that being said, it depends really on a few things. It depends on the biggest thing is the culture of your organization. So, how willing are people to adopt some of these principles? Sometimes I go into companies and the engineers are like, "Oh my God, I have been talking about doing this since I got here, and no one's paid any attention. And now you're saying it, and then the company's like, oh well, maybe we should pay attention." And those turn out great. Sometimes I go in and they're like, "Oh, you don't understand, Dave. We have real problems here. We have to deal with security and compliance." Oh, okay, yes, I'm sure you're the first company to deal with security and compliance, but we have to do everything by hand in the data center. We have to custom artisanally craft everything. I'm like, okay, so where we're going to start here is that you don't actually have to do that. But I have worked with big financial fintech clients that the question is like that you asked is sort of how long does it take? And like we got their first product from let's say data center into cloud in let's say 6 months. But then they didn't have one product; they had more product. They had and it took them 4.5 years to get all the different products in, because like what makes sense, we started with the easier stuff and they moved on to the harder stuff. And as they got into the harder stuff, they had already built a lot of this capacity, a lot of the let's call it tips and tricks or whatever you want to call it, so that when they got to their really intractable problems, the things that had, and this is, you read my book, so this was the first quote on the first page, on the first line of the first anything, was make the hard things easy so you can work on harder things. And so they had worked on things that had been hard before, and those things are now easy. And then they were able to work on harder things. And, ultimately they, fully cloud, fully everything, huge successful IPO, like all kinds of stuff. But yeah, it can take a while.
Yeah, I think that message is important because in a lot of cases, I like to think a lot about how markets have evolved, and a lot of SaaS companies that you see today that are 10 million, 50 million, 100 million
Mm.
started often 20 years ago, and they grew with the market, and now they have all of this legacy stuff in place, and that's normal and natural for any business to have gone through so many
Yeah.
evolutionary stages. But with that comes this form of technical debt that you kind of have to fix and remove. It's like a type of liability on the balance sheet that's kind of weighing you down, right? So if you don't do that, then over time it just keeps growing, and at the rate at which technology is accelerating, your technical debt, if you don't address it, I would say increases exponentially by the year because you're just leaving it there and not removing it from that balance sheet.
Yeah, I love that. Oh, what you said. I think there's a couple of things that are really important there. One is, no one should feel bad about the fact that they, were around for a long time and now they're going slow. And that's why you're here. That's why you got an investment from private equity, is like you built something valuable and people are recognizing that. And that's why they want to make an investment in you. And that's a good thing. That's something you should be proud of. Like it's, yeah, if you were a little startup that started last month, you would have much more modern development practices. So what? Big deal. That's not, that's definitely not something to feel bad about. And then the technical debt thing I love because everybody talks about it like it's this, oh gosh, we have all this technical debt. Technical debt is, is basically I made the appropriate choices at the time for the situation that I was in. Like, what, who would run a business making the appropriate choices for the place that they're going to be 10 years from now? That's insane. You don't know what's going to happen in 10 years. I don't, I work with a company that, we can talk about it, but they wanted to do a 3-year product roadmap in 2 years. And I was like, you don't know what's going to happen in 3 years. You don't know what's going to happen next year. Like if the Moneyball thing, if you can deliver with speed and quality, often you can respond to whatever happens. But like the way that you guys plan this out, like every single thing that you want to do has to go perfect for the next 2 years. I was like, what do you think the statistical probability is that every single thing is going to go perfect? It's a joke. Like, forget it. And so there's nothing wrong with technical debt, like in terms of like, people made the right choices at the right time. It's very, very rare that I bump into anybody where I'm just like, what were you thinking? It just doesn't happen. But Ward Cunningham, one of the signatories of the Agile Manifesto, was the guy who came up with this term technical debt. And the thing that he was concerned with was a little, kind of what you're talking about, drag on the organization. And like, if you don't pay down this technical debt, to use that, that phraseology, like, then you get more and more drag, and that starts to slow you down. And if the whole thing that you and I have been talking about is delivering with speed and quality, well, I'm not going to have speed if I keep getting dragged down. And so that's when we make those investments, because we want to be able to go fast again and we want to be able to compete. That's what this is about, right?
I literally wrote down Agile Manifesto like 5 seconds before you said it, as that was going to be my next question. So that's
We're
pretty
in
cool.
sync.
So yeah, the question I had on that is the Agile Manifesto is about culture, right? It's about how you think about how you organize yourselves to ship product, and it's almost like a philosophical difference between a waterfall method or what have you. So inside these companies, I would, from what I've experienced, and just curious for your take, is there's just like resistance to changing culture. And that's one of the biggest things that's holding these companies back from changing how they operate. And so talk about the people side of that, because I feel like that's really what needs to change.
Yeah, survival is not mandatory. Deming. But you know, I think the fun thing about the Agile Manifesto, and I loved how you know brought up waterfall, is waterfall is just was what we were just talking about. Waterfall assumes that I have knowledge of what's going to happen in the future, that I can predict. You know, trust me, I've worked, you know, early in my career, especially at companies that ran by waterfall, and they're like, we're going to do this, and then this is going to happen, and then this is going to line up, and then, you know, we had the Gantt charts and the things and whatever, and it turns out that, you know, let's say it's January, and we said, you know, we're going to do 6 months of development, and, you know, on August 1st, we're going to hand it to QA. How often do you think we actually handed it to QA on August 1st? Never. It never happened. Like it's like a joke. Like it's so funny. And like that's what the Agile Manifesto is about, and this idea of culture, right? Is they didn't pick the name Agile out of the sky. Like Agile means agile, like actually being agile and being able to respond. And so if I get new information, I adjust, right? I don't get new information and say, no, look, the Gantt chart says this, so this is what we're gonna do. I have new information. Why would I do that? I'm just throwing money in the garbage. So you know, getting people to come along and realize that like this isn't, first of all, agile doesn't mean no planning. That's like ridiculous. I don't, whoever's, you know, got that idea into their heads, that's not what it's about at all. Is that in agile we plan very carefully around closer time horizons, and we plan more loosely about further out time horizons. And I'm going to just go out on a limb here. I'll bet you do the same thing in marketing. You don't plan what the marketing message is going to be 2 years from now, but you, since you work with product, you know, like this is the direction that the product is heading, and in 2 years from now, these are the kinds of things we're going to be talking about in our marketing materials. Do you develop all the PDFs today for 2 years from now? No, of course not. And like, why do people in software have the used to at least have this notion that like, well, I'm gonna decide exactly what's gonna happen in the future? Like, you don't know. It doesn't matter, and it's a waste of time. And so with Agile, we really concentrate on the things that we're gonna deliver, let's say in the next few months, and the things that are further out. It's not like we don't think about them. We don't. Of course we do, but we don't spend a lot of time like drilling into the specifics of those things because it's nonsense. And so people have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable a bit. But the culture change ultimately, you know, it's like there's this great expression I love. If you show someone a class picture, the first person they look for is themselves, right? And so, you know, to get people to come along, you have to explain to them why this is good for them, right? And I, you know, back in the day, I worked, you know, when I was at Salesforce, I had a junior engineer come up to me. I was an architect, so you know, very high up on the technical ladder, and he was like, "Oh, I'm gonna, you know, learn this programming language," and I was like, "Why? Like, no one's gonna do stuff with that anymore." "Oh, no, no, you know," and I was like, "Before you do anything, go out and look for what jobs are available in the, you know, in the marketplace for people who know that language." And you know, he went back and he's like, "Yeah, there's like some publishing company in the middle of Pennsylvania, nowhere in farm country, that's looking for people that know how to do this, but everybody else is looking for this other skill." And I'm like, yeah, maybe you should be looking, you know, learning that other skill. So it's a little bit of skating to where the puck is going, but a lot of us, we already know where the puck is going. The puck is going to cloud. The puck is going to, like you said, continuous delivery, all these things. And so it's really like, hey, what kind of job do you want to have? And people really, they come around because they see it's in their best interest, which hilariously is in the company's best interest, which is also in the investor's best interest. So if I can make people's lives better, I'm going to give them a better life, then everybody wins. And so, like I said this in the book, like it's a win-win-win job, which I don't even know if that many of these out there. Like it's a
Right.
blessing in a way.
How do you balance? And I'm hearing you talking. I'm like, all of these things make total sense. But inside of a business, you have all these competing priorities, and that's the reality of product teams in general, and every team really. But in product's case, you have these operational improvements
Yeah.
and then infrastructural or architectural improvements. And then you actually still have to ship features and product and roadmap requests from customers, or sales has certain feedback and certain things that you think might close more deals or capture a new part of the market. So how do you balance this transition to becoming more mature and sophisticated as an organization with those ongoing and pressing needs that actually move the needle on things like revenue and retention?
Yeah, I think there's two sides of it. One of the things I talk about, I ask people, what do you want to spend your engineering tokens on? And they're like, what does that mean? And I'm like, you only have a limited number of tokens, right? We can't do everything. Like that would be great. Unlimited resources, unlimited time. We can do anything, but nobody has that. Certainly no companies I've ever worked with have unlimited resources and unlimited time. So it means we have to get very clear about what we're going to do. And this, gets into these idea of prioritization and things like that. And CEOs that I work with love this because like people get real focused on the things that we have to do. And, I talk to the engineers and they're like, well, what should I be working on? I'm like, what's the most important thing to the business? And they're like, what? I'm like, work on the things that are most important to the business. I'm like, if your boss comes to you and, you're not delivering enough stuff maybe or whatever, and they're like, well, what are you working on? You say, I'm working on the things that are most important to the business. What are they going to say to you? Don't do that? Like, no way. They're going to say, carry on. And then, um, so like that's kind of one half of it. The other half of it is a lot of people who are like, we can't do this, we can't do that. They're thinking about it in terms of what they're doing right now. And like there are no teams that I work with that, by the end of the engagement can deliver just as much stuff as they did before. Like no way. They're way past that. They're delivering way more things. And so there is an ability to balance those things out. And so, the things that people, and this is what Agile is good for in a lot of ways, the things that people get upset about isn't so much if I'm in product and you tell me you're going to deliver. I say I want this on August 1st, or you say you want this on August 1st, and I say, Shiv, how about we give it to you on August 15th? You're like, well, that's not really what I want, but are you going to give it to me on August 15th? And you say, absolutely. If you deliver on August 15th, like most people will accept that. The things that people get really upset about is that you say, you say, I want it on August 1st. And I go, sure, Shiv, no problem, August 1st. And then August 1st comes around and you're like, where is it? And I'm like, oh, how about the 7th? And then they're like, okay, fine. And then on the 7th, it's not there. And then the 21st, you deliver it. It's all this like, uncertainty on short time horizons that are the things that make people really upset. And so when we can get our capabilities down, when we can make the hard things easy so we can work on harder things, then being able to deliver on a lot of things with consistency, speed and quality again, isn't as hard to do because I know what my capacity is. I know what are the things that we can do. I know that if, I go to you and Shiv, if we can get this thing working or whatever, I'll be able to give you 3 times as much stuff. You might be like, you know what? Do it because I want 3 times as much stuff. Whereas like if I'm just keep coming to you with excuses after excuses and you don't believe a word I have to say about anything, no, you're going to be like, no, give it to me on the thing. That's what I want it. And so all this idea of like maintenance, patching, I think is some of the stuff you're alluding to, whatever, security, all those things we can do, but we can only do them if we have a system in place that allows us to reliably deliver the things that we say we're going to deliver. And then, then your job as the product guy, or your job, we're talking about marketing, really, on this podcast, right? Your job as the marketing person becomes a lot easier to deal with. And so one of the stories I told in the book, right, was about working with a marketing department. What we used to do is we used to deliver a product, and then we would, tell the marketing department, hey, we delivered this thing. And then they would be like, okay, great. Can you give us all the collateral, right? The blog posts, the things that we want to put on Twitter, the things like that. And so, like, the product to be out in the marketplace, but nobody knew about it because marketing now is starting to collect all their stuff. And we're like, hey, you know what? Let's reimagine this. Let's look at this differently. Like, we know when we're going to release this. We know what's going to be inside this feature. We're not guessing. We're not going to discover what that is on the day it goes out into production. We know that ahead of time. So, we worked with them to say, like, well, when would you need this? When would you need that? So by the time that thing was turned on in production, everything was ready. The blog posts are ready to go. The tweets are ready to go. It became like a non-event. Like, everybody set up their stuff in whatever, HubSpot. I don't know. You know what the tools are. So that it all automatically just went, and everything just happened. And instead of being this like thing everybody has to make a big deal about, and we have to give up our Saturday, it just became releasing software is a non-event. We just do it.
What about, and that's a great answer. What about bigger initiatives? And I bring this up even with this idea of this, you're talking about monolith systems that have multiple modules intertwined, and that's an example of just breaking that up is a big initiative and takes time, right? And some cases, like, these monoliths are so huge that it could be more than a year that you're talking about to run through that.
Absolutely.
And then there's other initiatives, like if we're launching a new product or a new capability, like let's say you're launching a payments platform or for a software that doesn't have it, or launching an upmarket product that requires a whole new set of functionality. How do you bring this philosophy to that, where you kind of need to get to a new state first and ship that? Or even then, do you see this philosophy of continuous delivery applying?
So, like, think about what we talked about with Agile, right? This idea that, like, we understand what's going to happen on a short time horizon, or a shorter time horizon, let's say, and the things that are going to happen out in the future we understand, but we're a lot less clear about. If I have this big monolith or whatever that I want to break apart, I don't go about doing that by, like, sending everybody in. They're going to spend a year and a half, and then boom, there's a huge explosion. Now I have 15 microservices. Like, it just doesn't work that way, right? What we do is there's a lot of software engineering techniques for this, but, like, one example is what's called the strangler pattern. So, like, we sort of break off a piece, right? And we start talking to that piece through a different interface, like an API, application programming interface, right? And that thing will still talk to the stuff behind, but now we're used to talking to that thing. And then over time, we can break off that functionality from the big monolith, and nobody really knows. Nobody knows the difference. Like, to everybody, they're like, oh, well, we're still talking to the same API. What's happening behind that? Nobody knows. It's irrelevant. Like, the only team that knows what's really happening behind the scenes there is the team who's developing that API. And we can strangle off pieces from the monolith over time and worry about those pieces, so that we don't have to wait the year or whatever it takes to get the benefits. We get benefits right from the beginning, and we keep accumulating those benefits. To use the term that you were talking about earlier, we keep paying down that tech debt, and the more we break these, we pay this stuff down, the faster we get to go. And that allows us to really, break these things apart, but in a way that makes sense. And we're not trying to boil the ocean. We're trying to make incremental improvements over time.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. And actually, I would love to keep talking. We're running up on time, but as an ending message, I think just for the audience, as they as I think about these types of projects, there is a natural inclination that everybody has to build something to completion before it's taken to market. And I think just as a philosophy of piecemealing it and having that continuous feedback loop is a great message. But if the audience wants to learn more, what's the best place they can go to learn more about you or your book?
So certainly mangoteque.com. I write every month about, you can sign up for a mailing list there. I write every month about these kinds of topics, about the things I see inside portfolio companies. And for me, I think, I work a lot with CTOs. That's, mostly the people I work with. But I also work with investors, right? Because I think, number one, when I know what your investment thesis is, that helps me a lot to shape things. But number two, this is alpha, right? This is the thing that can differentiate your firm from the other firms. If Toyota was really good at finance, which all PE folks are good at finance, but pretty good at marketing, whatever, but didn't know anything about cars, how good would they be, right? And understanding this stuff about how software is made, what are the time frames, what are we talking about when we're talking about breaking up a monolith? I think that stuff is really important. So I write about those things. Definitely, check out my book, DevOps Patterns for Private Equity. It is not hard to find. It's everywhere that anyone sells any books anywhere. And and just, really hope that people take this idea to heart about Moneyball. You really want more at bats. You want to have more chances to get this right and beat the competition. And so that's kind of any company, but it's really with this 3 to 5 year investment thesis, I think it's really key for private equity.
That's awesome. And we'll be sure to include all of that in the show notes. And with that said, Dave, thanks for coming on and sharing your wisdom. I think a ton of companies and firms and investors can learn a lot from it when they think about the technology side of their businesses and how to create value there. So I appreciate you doing this.
Thanks, Shiv.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. Before you take off, just a few requests from our side. Number one, if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or Spotify or YouTube or wherever you go to listen to your podcasts. Number two, if you are in the market for due diligence services, strategy consulting, or fractional CMO services, please get in touch with us at www.howtosaas.com. And third, please buy a copy of my new book, Exit Ready Marketing. It covers a ton of concepts that we take our customers through, private equity investors, B2B companies, CEOs, operating partners, and marketers. And there's a ton of great value in there that expands on my previous book, Post-Acquisition Marketing, as well. So with that said, I hope you enjoyed today's content, and we'll see you on the next episode.